Hey guys, welcome back. Today we are going to be working out in the cut flower garden and we are going to start digging up our dahlias, which is so bittersweet for me. You know how much I love our dahlias and how attached I am to them. So to start saying goodbye to them is definitely bittersweet, and might have shed a tear or two because it's just so hard. It's so hard. I know it's part of it. It's part of the whole process, but at the same time, it's just always hard for me to say goodbye to them every season. So let me flip my camera around. Let me show you how things are looking, and then we will talk about today's game plan for today's project. Here is how the flowers are looking, and you can tell they're on their last leg. Some of them are still trying to pull through and do something, but for the most part, they're pretty much done for the season. I've already harvested all of the seed heads that I wanted for the most part. And then if I swing over here, I also want to come in and clean up this flower bed because this is where we had all of our zinnias, and you can see it got hit pretty hard. What I would like to do is come in here and also harvest some of these seed heads on our zinnias. Let me see if I can just pop this one off. You can see there are some good seeds in here. It's probably hard to see with this camera, but I want to see if we have anything viable, anything good in here. So I'll just cut some of these heads off and we'll pop them into a paper bag. And then I also want to clear out the celosia bed because they're also done for the season. I've already harvested the seeds that I wanted, and I will treat both of these beds as no-till. So I will cut everything down to the ground, but I'm not going to actually remove the roots of the plants that are in here. I tried to hold off as much as I could, but we're obviously done. And today is a beautiful, dry, warm day that I would like to get this done before we start getting rain. We won't go through all of the rows of dahlias because I like to kind of stagger them as I'm taking them out and storing them, so it's not super overwhelming because we don't have a ton of room to have them everywhere if I dug them all at once. But you can see, look at this. There are still some bee action going on. Very slow, but nonetheless, we still have some bees buzzing around in the garden. There was a honeybee in here just a minute ago. I typically like to get our dahlias dug up after we've had our first frost, but because we are traveling at the end of the month, I at least want to get the majority of them out. But because we garden in zone 8B, I'm not in a rush to get them out of the ground. We can technically leave our dahlias in the ground if you're in zone 8 or above, is like the safe zones. And I've done a video on that, on how you overwinter your dahlias if you're going to leave them in the ground, which I'll link down below in the description box. But I like to dig mine up because I divide them. I might do a small sale probably in the springtime, depending how they overwinter when we store them. So we'll see how they look once we dig them up and then we have everything divided and how my stock looks. But I also like to rotate my dahlias out. There are some that I try and I'm like, well, you're okay, but you don't quite make the cut. And because I have to be selective of what I am growing because I don't have a ton of room yet, I have to kind of like really love the ones that I love and that I think are going to be beautiful for arranging, and I would love to start selling flowers and bouquets next year. So I have to be a little bit methodical of what I want to grow in our dahlia beds. We will talk about storing dahlias after we dig them up. However, I want to go into a deep dive into all of the ways that you can store your dahlias because there's so much great information out there, and I think it can be a little bit overwhelming. There are so many methods, so many materials that you can store your dahlias in. And some people will say this way is better or this is the only right way. But honestly, when it comes down to it, it's all about what works best for you. My experience is going to be different than yours, or yours is going to be different than mine. But I do want to call out a few things on storage mediums. And I want to do that in a separate video so this video doesn't end up being so long. So today I really just want to focus on digging, cleaning up the other two beds, and then just see how far we get. And I'm really excited to dig up the row that we're going to be digging up today because I've been dying to see what the tuber production is like on some of these varieties that I really cherished this year. We'll also take a deep dive into dividing, but I do have several videos on dividing dahlia clumps. I think it can be a little bit overwhelming if you're new to it, but don't get overwhelmed. I am here to literally hold your hand and help you throughout the whole process. We're gonna get through it. I have some great examples in the previous videos that I've already posted, which again, I will link down below. But I feel like there's a bug in my hair. Sorry, I keep getting distracted. But anyways, today let's just focus on the digging, and then we will do a full video on dividing and storing, just really get into the nitty-gritty of that whole process. So let's start out with the first row here today, and we'll just walk through and I'll show you what I'm going to do, and then we will just jump right in. As I mentioned, we haven't had our first frost yet, but the theory is if your dahlias have been in the ground for more than 120 days, then they're okay to be dug up. Other growers will say, no, you should wait till you've had a first frost, because they go through like a physiological process where they just tend to store better once they've been hit by a frost, or you can cut them down, leave them on for a couple of weeks, and then start digging them up. Again, everybody's experience is a little bit different, and I kind of fall right in between. I will start digging up this first row here just to show you guys what the process is like, but I will continuously move down our cut flower garden and just do one row at a time. Before we begin, I will come in with scissors and just cut the netting that I put down. If you recall, I talked about putting this down because we had so many little critters digging into our beds and moving our tubers around. So I just put this netting down to protect them, which worked really, really well. So I will go ahead and cut a slit in these and pull this back so we can dig our dahlias. So let me show you the tools that I like to use, and then we'll go kind of step by step on what to do. Here is my lineup of the tools I like to use for this. I will come in with a pitchfork. This is nice to use because it lessens the likelihood of you puncturing your dahlia tubers, because once you're going in, they can typically just fall right in between the forks. So this one is the one I like to use, and I'll make sure to link some things down below for you guys. I will also use these large shears to cut down the stalks of the dahlias. You can tell, let's see, look at this one. They have really thick stalks. They're pretty thick, and if you have a lot to go through, using regular pruners, your hands are going to start getting really stiff. So keeping that in mind, like just, you know, be mindful of your body when you're doing this. Use good practices when you can. So that's why I like to use these big shears, or you can use loppers as well. That also works. We will still need regular pruners to come in and cut some of the smaller stalks, and then just snips so I can cut anything smaller I need to get into little areas. So that is all we're going to need for today's project. All right, before we start, I'm just going to cut down our string that we had here that we used to corral our dahlias in place. All right, next we are going to be cutting them down to about 12 inches. That way we still leave a little bit of the stalk left, so it gives us something to grip when we are lifting them up from the soil. And then we will start digging, which is the really fun part, because we get to see all of the treasures that are hiding in the soil. So let's begin. Okay, don't cry, but here we go. All right, now we're going to come in with our pitchfork, but instead of digging right here, you're going to come out probably about 10 to 12 inches away from that center stalk, because if you start digging here, you're going to start puncturing and breaking your tubers. So you want to give them a little bit of space, and then we're going to push in and then just slowly start lifting like this. And you can see that there's quite a bit of soil around them. So what you can do is just start removing the soil around them. And then I lift them up. And here comes the fun part. This is where we get to see how things did for us. And this one here is Hapat Old Charm, which is a very difficult one to find. And it was a cutting that I bought. And it produced some nice tubers. I am super, super excited about this. I'm smiling like a goof right now because I was so excited to see how this one did. That makes me so happy, you guys. You have no idea how happy this makes me. So first one done, and let's finish up this row. I am super happy with how our clumps look so far. Like, you guys have no idea. To me, this is like Christmas morning, but better because it's dahlias. And this means more dahlias next year, which makes me so happy. And I am so excited to see how the rest of them look. Now, this one is Ka Cinder Rose. This was a cutting that I bought. Now, remember, when you grow dahlias from cuttings, they don't produce the same amount of tubers as ones grown directly from a tuber. So keep that in mind if you have a lot of cuttings that you're digging up and you're thinking like, wow, these are not quite that great. That's normal. I've had success with a lot of cuttings from other, like several places do well for me. So I am happy that this looks pretty good. I'm curious to see how our other cuttings from the same place look. We got these at Stonehouse Dahlias. And I want to dig them up actually with you guys and see how they look, because we have, I think, 1, 2, 3 more in this bed over here that I want to get out. And so we'll see how those look. But I am so far super happy with how all of them look. And I will come in now and cut all of our dahlias down with our big shears and then just leave them at that like 12-inch height and leave that in for about a week. And then I'll start digging more up. And the reason is there's a theory that they store better once you do that. So I did that last year and they were storing up really good until we had that freeze, and then I lost all of my tubers, which was just awful. But this year I have a better game plan to store them inside somewhere. So hopefully we're not gonna have any issues. But the theory again is once you cut them and you leave them in the ground for a little bit longer, their skin tends to harden up a little bit and they store better. So that is what I'm going to do with the rest of our dahlias in our beds here, and then just start digging them up again row by row, so I'm not getting overwhelmed and filling up my entire house full of clumps for them to dry out. So I have here Ka Guava and Ka Desert Rose, which were also new to me this year, and they were cuttings, and then Ka Pichu, which came from another farmer, and that was also a cutting. So let's see how these look. One thing I wanted to call out is if you have a bad back and you have a lot of dahlias to dig up, instead of cutting them with the shears like I do before I start digging them up, go ahead and just start digging them up like this. That way you can just pull the whole thing up like this and then cut them once you have them all lifted up. That way you're not bending over or squatting over. So just again, something to keep in mind if you have a bad back or you're in any sort of pain or anything like that, or you have a ton to do, try that method out, and then you can cut them down once you get them out of their little area where they're growing. Look at that. Little tea intermission. Makes the job much funner that way. All right, we have Ka Peach and Ka Guava and then Desert Rose. All seem to produce good tubers. That's exciting. And I'm actually most excited for the cuttings I took, to be honest. I took a ton of cuttings from Cafe Olay and Venus, and the plants grew like you wouldn't believe. And I don't want to brag, but they did really good. So I'm excited to dig those up as well. And I'll show you what those clumps look like once I get them out of the ground. But there we go. Looking good. So now that you have these dug up, you have a couple of decisions to make. Are you going to store them now, or are you going to divide them and then store them? For me, what works best for me is I like to start dividing them now, and I'll continue dividing throughout winter time because it saves me room. Because if I start storing all of our clumps like this, we have about, I think about 400, maybe a little over 400. I don't have a root cellar or a barn to store these in. I wish I did, but I don't have one right now. So it's just not, it's not practical for me to leave them this way. So what I will do is go ahead and rinse them off, let them dry for maybe, I don't know, 6 hours. I'll put them in a bedding of vermiculite, and then I'll start dividing them and storing them back. If you're going to leave them in clumps, I recommend you leave the soil on. The theory is if you can just leave the soil on there, they will store better this way. However, there's one caveat. If you see a tuber on that clump that looks like it's rotting out, I would go ahead and rinse that whole clump and cut that rotted tuber out, just because you don't want it to continue rotting if you put them in storage. So that is just something to keep in mind. Again, we will do a full detailed video of the different methods of storing and what you can do. And like I said, don't listen to the people that are like, it's this way or the highway, because that's not true. Every method, like there's so many methods, and each method works better for one person and not the other, or vice versa, right? So all methods work, is what I'm here to say. So there's not one that's more right than the other, if that makes sense. One other important note I want to call out is once you dig up your tubers, you don't want to leave these out, especially in an area that gets below 45 degrees, because they will not make it. I will bring these inside and let them dry out for about, I don't know, 6 to 8 hours, maybe 24 hours, depending on how wet they are. They're not too bad right now. So I think about 6 hours will be good. And then I'll start storing them, dividing and storing them. You don't want to leave these out for too long, because what will happen is they will start shriveling up and drying out, and they'll almost become a little bit rubbery, and that's when you know you've left them out for way too long. I'll often see people comment or ask questions like, what happened to my tubers? When I pulled them out, they were so plump and like beautiful and full. Now they're just like soft and kind of shrivelly and wrinkly. So it's just not a good look, and they're not going to store very well over winter time, and you could risk losing them altogether. So don't leave these out for very long. I promise you will regret it. I have made that mistake when I started growing dahlias, and I kicked myself because they all shriveled up to like little prunes, and I was like, what happened? So I try to get them into storage as quickly as I can. If I'm storing them now, I will go ahead and cut all of these roots off, because these don't serve a purpose, and just leave the clump as it is, and then start dividing them as we go. So let's go ahead and rinse a couple of these off, and I'll show you how I clean them up before I start dividing them. Again, if you're gonna store them now, just leave the soil on if it's not too wet. So anyways, let's get to it. Ideally, you want to have something with the jet setting, but because the soil is so loose on here, I think it'll come off just fine. So just rinse these off nicely. Now it'll be a lot easier to start dividing these and getting them into storage. This is KA Desert Rose, and this is Kipling Moonglow, for reference. So here's one of our rinsed ones, and what I like to do is just cut off all of these roots, because when I start dividing, these they just get in the way. They serve no purpose, and they're just a mess. So I just cut them all off. And if I see any skinny little tubers that are dangling off one of the main tubers, I cut them off as well. I don't think I see any on here, but in my previous videos, you can definitely see some really good examples of some tricky and like really dense clumps that I divide, which is a good reference if you're new to dividing. But I'll just come in and clean them as much as I can. And I would still do the same thing if I was going to leave the soil on around them and not rinse them like I did here. I think it also just looks a lot less intimidating when we do this and we start dividing, it's just easier to see what's going on and it's not as scary or overwhelming. So you see, that's how it should look. Here's a clump that hasn't been rinsed and I've left some of the soil on. I will also clean this up a bit before I store it, if I was going to store them right now and not divide them. Anything that's broken, I also just cut off. Oh, here's a good example. Do you see how we have a bunch of little feeder tubers on one tuber here? I just cut those off. They're not really doing anything, so I just get them off. Here's another broken neck. We'll cut those roots. You kind of have to be ruthless a little bit. So don't be afraid. All right, that looks much better. This is how I would store them if I was going to keep the soil on and not divide them right now, just like this. And just one quick note, if you are going to store them as clumps like this, make sure you cut down that stalk all the way down to the base. Just make sure you don't lose your labels. All right, let's finish cutting down this row of dahlias, and then we will remove the clumps that we have dug up, put them together in a little pile, and then we will move down to the zinnias. All right, we're running out of daylight, so let's come in and just harvest some seed heads. I already harvested some seeds before they looked deathly like this right now, but in short, all I'm going to do is cut the heads off and then label each paper bag depending on the variety that they are, and just leave them in here until I can come in and just break the seed heads open and then harvest the seeds that look viable. So super easy, something fun to do right now if you still have zinnias in your garden. First up, we have alpenglow. Some of these look terrible, but if you look closely, they have nice seeds, and this is what I'm looking for. So we'll see how this experiment works. I've never harvested them this late. If you have, let me know what your experience has been. But I figured, theoretically, they should be fine. For some of these that have been pollinated but still have some petals on them, I am going to cut the petals just like this and leave them out to dry, and then harvest the seeds from them. So that is another trick you can do. All right, guys, I think we will end today's video here. It's getting dark, so it's not fun to film in the dark. I'll continue working, and actually I'm going to start helping Sergey out with some of our Christmas lights here in a bit. But it's just not fun to film in the dark. So anyways, we will go ahead and I will get all of those clumps that we dug up and I'll rinse them off, bring them inside, let them sit there until they're dry to the touch. And then I will put them in a big bin full of vermiculite and leave them there until I start dividing them. Again, do not forget to get your clumps or your tubers in storage. Don't leave them out for too long because they will start to shrivel. And again, keep them protected from the elements. You don't want to leave them out, especially if it's going to dip below 45 or 50 degrees. Keep them in the area that they're going to be protected until you're ready to get to them. But don't leave them out for too long because they will start shriveling. And I don't want you to go through all of this work and then lose them because we forgot about them because they were drying out for too long. So keep that in mind. I will go ahead and bring in the zinnias. We will come in another day and just get everything chopped down. But as far as the dahlias go, I am so excited at how the clumps are looking, and I'm hoping, keeping my fingers crossed, that they all look like that and they all look good. And if that's the case, then I think we're going to have a very, very good inventory of tubers, which makes me excited. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today in my garden, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.